Welcome in, and thank you so much for joining us today. We have a truly fascinating exploration lined up for you.
Hello, this is Jordan.
And this is Quinn.
We are thrilled to have you sitting right here at the table with us. Just to give you a little context on where I'm coming from, I am a commercial beekeeper based out of North Dakota. I manage thousands of colonies across the state, which means, my daily life is deeply rooted in practical, large-scale agriculture. I am notoriously skeptical of marketing hype, and I rely entirely on hard field data when it comes to bee health and honey production.
Which, honestly, serves as the perfect counterbalance to my world. My background is in apiology and melitology, which is really just a fancy way of saying I study the intricate biology of bees and the complex chemistry of what they produce. My passion is taking the dense, microscopic science of the hive and translating it into plain, accessible language that you can actually use. Exactly. And today, we're unpacking a remarkable set of field notes titled The Manuka Terroir and MGO Potency, 12 Sanctuary Field Observation Series, 2023 to 2026. If you want to follow along or check out the raw data for yourself, you can find the source material at manukawoundscience.org. Our mission for this session is to uncover how extreme environmental stress and unique geology can transform ordinary honey into a highly potent medical-grade clinical tool.
What stands out immediately in these field notes is that we're looking at the intersection of botany, geology, and entomology. To really understand the scope of this research, we first need to define what makes Manuka honey so biologically significant in the first place. And that really comes down to a compound called MGO, or methylglycol.
Right, and I hear MGO thrown around constantly at beekeeping conventions, usually by salesmen trying to justify a massive price tag on a tiny jar. But chemically speaking, what is it actually doing inside a wound that, say, standard clover honey from my farm can't do?
Well, methylglyoxal is a naturally occurring compound, renowned for its really powerful antimicrobial and therapeutic properties. Standard honey relies mostly on hydrogen peroxide and high sugar content to inhibit bacteria, but MGO operates on a totally different level. It's the core engine behind Manuka honey's ability to disrupt bacterial biofilms and support complex wound healing, particularly against drug-resistant strains like MRSA.
Wait, for those who don't work in a clinic, a biofilm is basically a protective slime armor that bacteria build around themselves, correct?
Right.
And the MGO is actually breaking through that armor.
That is a perfect analogy. The bacteria hunker down inside that slime to hide from antibiotics. MGO acts like a chemical battering ram that breaks apart the structural integrity of that biofilm, exposing the bacteria underneath. And you mentioned MRSA, which stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. That is a highly aggressive antibiotic-resistant staph infection that absolutely plagues hospitals. MGO has been shown to be uniquely effective at stopping its replication. But MGO doesn't just magically appear out of nowhere. This is where the concept of Manuka terroir comes into play. Just like a fine wine is shaped by the specific soil and climate of its vineyard, Manuka honey's potency is entirely dictated by its environment.
So we're talking about the specific conditions where the Manuka bush, the Leptospermum scoparium, is physically growing.
Exactly. The research shows that when these bushes are subjected to severe environmental stress, specifically high altitude, high thermal stress, and highly acidic volcanic soil, they trigger a botanical defense mechanism. The plant responds to this harsh environment by secreting up to 15% more DHA, or dihydroxyacetone, directly into its nectar.
Hold on, you're telling me the dirt the bush grows in changes the chemical composition of the nectar by that much? In North Dakota, my clover honey doesn't change drastically based on the soil. It might shift the flavor profile slightly, but we aren't seeing massive biological spikes. Why is Manuka so remarkably sensitive to its environment?
Think of it as a survival reflex. The Manuka bush evolved in a highly volatile volcanic landscape. When the soil is rich in harsh volcanic minerals and the temperatures are fluctuating wildly, the plant perceives a threat to its survival. To ensure it successfully reproduces before it dies, it supercharges its nectar with DHA to make it as chemically attractive and potent as possible. It's literally pouring all its defensive energy into that nectar.
And that is exactly where my bees take over the equation. You have this stressed-out Manuka bush producing this DHA-loaded nectar. But then you need the insect workforce. In the beekeeping world, when a specific flower is blooming heavily, we call that a nectar flow. During a heavy Manuka nectar flow, the older bees in the colony, the foragers, are out there aggressively harvesting this specific nectar and bringing it back to the hive.
And that transition from flower to hive is where the chemistry shifts in a major way.
Right. The foragers pass this DHA-rich nectar off to the receiver bees inside the hive. The bees add their own specific enzymes to it, and they store it in the wax comb. The internal environment of the hive acts like a giant living bioreactor. The temperature, the humidity, the fanning of thousands of wings, it all works together to convert that precursor DHA directly into the active MGO that you eventually find in the jar. It's an incredible biological handoff from plant to insect to active compound.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger geographic picture, you start to see why this specific landscape of New Zealand is so vital. The 12 sanctuary data table in the observation series perfectly illustrates how environmental stress and volcanic soil equal higher potency. Let's look at a few specific sites from the research to show you the pattern.
Yeah, I'm looking at the data for the Coromandel Peninsula Sanctuary right now. This site sits at about 340 meters in elevation. It has highly acidic volcanic soil and a maritime temperate climate. The honey harvested from this specific terroir yields a massive MGO rating of 850 plus. The researchers classify this as a premium clinical grade.
Now, compare that to the Rotorua volcanic site, which sits a bit higher at 380 meters. The soil there is pumice volcanic, and the area experiences extreme thermal stress. That combination produces a very high yield of 790 MGO, which is also a premium grade. But then look what happens when we remove that geological stress. Down in Hawke's Bay, the elevation drops to just 100 meters. The soil is limestone alluvial, so no harsh volcanic acidity, and the climate is mild and Mediterranean-like.
A much more comfortable, relaxed environment for the plant to grow in.
Precisely. Because the plant is less stressed, it secretes significantly less DHA. The resulting honey from Hawke's Bay yields a lower 620 MGO. It is still a fantastic standard-grade honey, but you clearly see the severe drop in potency when you take away the volcanic soil and the thermal stress.
So what does this all mean for the consumer or the clinician? It means New Zealand's monopoly on medical-grade Manuka is not just a clever marketing claim. As a commercial operator, I see a lot of localized honey-making, big, sweeping health claims. But New Zealand is literally the only place on Earth with this highly specific volcanic soil chemistry combined with this native plant. You cannot just plant a Manuka bush in a greenhouse in California and expect these biological results.
They also pair that unique geology with intense scientific regulation to ensure the integrity of the product.
Right. The Ministry for Primary Industries, the MPI in New Zealand, enforces incredibly strict regulations that I honestly wish we had stateside. Every single batch of export Manuka undergoes mandatory DNA barcoding to verify that the pollen and nectar signature comes strictly from Leptospermum scoparium flowers. You cannot fake this process.
Which brings us to a fascinating feature of this research series. The researchers maintain a live New Zealand apiary feeds page. These are live readings from sensors installed at the certified Manuka apiaries in New Zealand, and each metric directly affects the MGO concentration in the honey, which determines its antimicrobial potency for wound healing.
It's brilliant because they are tracking the exact environmental metrics, the humidity, the temperature swings in real time. The methodology driving this potency isn't left to guesswork. In the research, they outline 3 primary pillars of MGO methodology. The first, as we mentioned, is soil pH and mineralogy. Volcanic soils with high mineral density increase that DHA secretion by 15%. The second pillar is thermal stress indices.
Those high diurnal temperature swings, the hot days and cold nights create a metabolic potency spike in the plant. And the third pillar is atmospheric curing. The sensors track the internal humidity of the hive. When ambient humidity drops, it allows the bees to reduce the water content of the honey much faster, which naturally concentrates the MGO.
Let me tell you what atmospheric curing looks like on the ground, because this is something I deal with every single day in my own operations back in North Dakota. Beekeeping is entirely weather dependent. We get these massive weather fronts moving across the plains. One afternoon, the wind shifts, the temperature drops 15 degrees, and the humidity suddenly spikes or plummets. When weather conditions shift that violently, it completely changes the behavior of the colony. I'm constantly monitoring my hives for a healthy brood pattern, making sure the queen is laying eggs consistently in a tight circle and the workers are raising those larvae properly. If the weather is off and the humidity in the hive spikes, the bees have to spend all their energy fanning the comb to dry it out, and the brood pattern suffers.
That sounds incredibly stressful for the hive.
It is. I also have to watch out for drifting, which is when my foragers get blown off course by harsh winds or get confused by shifting microclimates and accidentally return to the wrong hive, causing massive population imbalances.
Managing thousands of colonies through those variables requires an incredible amount of vigilance.
It really does. And that is exactly why the stewardship protocols mentioned in this research really struck a chord with me. They emphasize low intervention beekeeping to preserve the clinical integrity of the honey. When you are trying to hit a quota, it is very tempting to micromanage the hive, but these New Zealand apiaries are taking a step back.
This raises an important point about the biology of the honey itself. Low-intervention beekeeping is vital because it preserves incredibly delicate, naturally occurring enzymes. One of the most important is glucose oxidase. When this specific enzyme comes into contact with moisture, like the fluid in a wound bed, it produces a slow, sustained release of hydrogen peroxide. You end up with the MGO working to forcefully disrupt bacterial biofilms, while the glucose oxidase provides a multi-layered antimicrobial defense. But those enzymes are extraordinarily fragile. They can be easily destroyed by overprocessing, excessive heat, or chemical exposure inside the hive.
Avoiding overharvesting and keeping synthetic chemicals out of the hive isn't just a crunchy, feel-good gimmick. It is absolutely foundational hive management if you want to produce a clinical-grade product. I have immense respect for that restraint. Back home, my commercial needs are intense. We are doing large-scale queen breeding to maintain colony numbers against winter losses. When the natural forage dries up in late summer, we have to feed massive amounts of pollen substitute just to keep the hives from starving. To be able to maintain commercial viability while strictly adhering to low-intervention, sanctuary-based methods in these remote New Zealand sites, it takes a level of dedication that most commercial operations simply cannot afford.
It highlights the stark difference between mass agricultural production and targeted therapeutic harvesting. That naturally leads us to how this honey is actually utilized by the end user. The researchers have provided an MGO decision tool in their notes to help match the specific potency tier to the right clinical or consumer scenario.
I found this tool incredibly refreshing. In my world, you constantly see companies trying to push their most expensive, highest-grade product on everyone, regardless of what the consumer actually needs. It is so grounded and honest to see a system that doesn't try to upsell everyone to an 850-plus clinical grade just to stir into their morning oatmeal. Let's walk through why you would actually choose one tier over another.
Right. At the very top, you have the MGO 850 Plus tier. This is the premium clinical grade utilizing that high-stress terroir we discussed, like the Coromandel Peninsula. This tier is incredibly thick and potent. It is strictly reserved for heavy biofilm disruption and dealing with severe MRSA-positive wounds in a medical setting. You do not use this casually.
Then you step down to the MGO 400-plus tier.
Yes, this standard grade is suited for routine wound maintenance and topical skin barrier protection. Below that, you have the MGO 300-plus tier, which drops the intensity further. This level is ideal for oral and mucosal care, as well as general wellness and dietary use. And finally, the MGO 50-plus tier, which is your perfect baseline multifloral honey for basic culinary use.
And the culinary 50-plus tier makes total sense because as the MGO concentration goes up, the honey actually takes on a slightly more medicinal, bitter flavor profile. If you are just making a glaze or sweetening tea, you want that 50-plus tier for the taste and the cost effectiveness. The field notes actually list several verified MGO sources to show the reality of this range. They reference consumer-grade products from Wetherspoon Organic and Manuka Health New Zealand. For example, at the absolute top end, they cite the Manuka Health Pinnacle Harvest MGO 1600 Plus, which comes from those intense Rotorua Volcanic and Coromandel peak sites.
They also note the Manuka Health Single Origin Poanui MGO 856 Plus, highlighting that specific terroir match we discussed earlier.
And all the way at the other end of the spectrum, they reference the Wetherspoon Raw Multifloral MGO 50 Plus, which comes from a much broader multifloral foraging range rather than an isolated volcanic peak. But I need to jump in here with a massive reality check. I eat my own honey straight from the comb all the time, but I would never, ever put it on an open cut. Every single product we just listed from those field notes, the 1600 plus, the 856 plus, the 50 plus, these are strictly food-grade consumer products. They are meant to be eaten.
I cannot emphasize this distinction enough. Consumer-grade Manuka honey, no matter how high the MGO rating printed on the jar, is not sterile. It may contain naturally occurring botulism spores or other environmental contaminants. Your digestive system can handle those trace spores with ease, but your bloodstream cannot. You must never, under any circumstances, use consumer-grade food honey on an open wound.
Exactly. Clinical-grade medical honey undergoes rigorous, specialized sterilization processes like gamma irradiation that neutralize those dangerous botulism spores without destroying the fragile MGO and glucose oxidase enzymes. If you are dealing with an open wound, you must consult a licensed clinician and use regulated, sterile, medical-grade honey.
Thank you for framing that so practically. It is the most important safety takeaway from this entire discussion. The research data documents the biological potency of the terroir. It is not a prescription for home wound care.
If we look back at all this data, a few major themes really stand out from the clinical observations. Let's distill this into 5 clear takeaways for you. First, the data clearly shows that sanctuary-sourced honey, protected from standard agricultural drift, produces 30 to 40% higher MGO than standard commercial sources, and that is purely due to controlling that environmental terroir.
Building on that, the second takeaway revolves around the technology. Live environmental monitoring guarantees batch consistency. By meticulously tracking the exact weather and hive conditions, producers can ensure predictable therapeutic outcomes year over year.
The third major takeaway is about stewardship. Low-intervention beekeeping is vital. By keeping synthetic chemicals out and managing the hives gently, producers preserve those fragile therapeutic enzymes like glucose oxidase, which are absolutely essential for the multi-layered wound healing process.
Takeaway 4 connects directly to the map. Geography dictates potency. Coastal and high-altitude volcanic sites consistently yield the highest potency honey, regularly hitting that 700-plus MGO premium grade, while mild valleys produce standard grades.
Finally, takeaway 5 is all about transparency. Terroir-based sourcing allows for incredible GPS-to-jar traceability. Clinicians can literally trace the biological efficacy of a sterile wound gel back to the exact volcanic hillside where the nectar was harvested.
It is a brilliantly cohesive system from soil to clinic.
Now, I want to remind you that this research isn't just a static PDF sitting on a server somewhere. It is actively connected to live, breathing ecosystems. If you want to see what's actually happening in these hives right now, not just read about it, check out the live feeds.
It is highly recommended to view those pages. The very environmental data we've been analyzing today, the thermal stress spikes, the humidity drops that cause the atmosphere curing that data, was pulled straight from these exact same monitoring systems. You can watch the real-time weather conditions that are actively dictating the MGO potency of tomorrow's harvest.
If you want to view that live apiary data or read through the clinical field notes we unpacked today, you can find all of it at manukawoundscience.org.
As we wrap up our time together, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We've spent this session examining how the Manuka bush, Leptospermum scoparium, only produces its most powerful, life-saving medicinal compounds when it is subjected to harsh environmental stress, high altitudes, and acidic volcanic soil. If it lived a comfortable life in a mild valley, it would never achieve its true therapeutic potential. What does that tell us about the biological value of adversity?
That is a fascinating question to leave on. The idea that stress and hardship are literally the catalysts for profound healing.
Yeah.
It's a powerful concept, whether you're talking about botany, biology, or maybe even our own human experience. Thank you so much for sitting down with us and sharing your time today. We love getting to share these discoveries with you.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Keep asking questions, keep looking deeper into the science around you, and take care of yourselves out there.
Until next time, stay curious. Goodbye.